it's Mitch with DrywallInstruction.com. Let's do a quick segment on taping by hand. Most do-it-yourselfers, when they do a taping project, they'll use a pan and knife and mud and tape by hand. This is probably one of the biggest trouble areas that people have when they're doing a taping and coating project. They oftentimes, probably 90% of the time that I go and I follow up on jobs or do some texturing or that type of a thing, the problem is they have bubbles in their tape. They don't even realize it sometimes. Other times they're just frustrated and then they don't know why. And there are a few critical steps when you tape by hand that are very simple that will avoid having any bubbles, and it'll make your taping project successful. So let's first talk about mud. The mud that I'm using is all-purpose mud. From the mud segment in my videos, you learn that all-purpose has a very strong glue base, it has adhesive to it, and we use it for taping and then we put it away until the texturing phase. Also, the all-purpose mud that I have has been mixed to consistency. Again, in my taping mixing taping mud segment, you'll learn how to do that. So I've got my all-purpose mud. I'm using all-purpose, actually using light all-purpose in this case. You don't have to use, you can use either one. I use the light muds because of the lightweight nature of them, and I do a lot of it, so it's easier on my body. So I've got this mixed to the right consistency. Now I can show you both how to do a flat seam as well as an angle or corner seam. Let's start with the flat seam. Okay, now that I've got my 6-inch knife and I've got my mud mixed properly, I can take my 6-inch knife and I can go ahead and I can just put mud on that seam, and I'm just going to cover the whole seam. I'm going to make sure that I don't get any junk in my mud like I've got there, and I'm going to make sure that I've got plenty of mud on that seam. And plenty of mud is when it's coated completely. There aren't any bubbles in my mud or that type of a thing. So once I've got my mud on my seam, I'll go ahead and take my tape, which is paper tape in this case, and it's the tape that I prefer to use. I'll explain that in another segment as well. So now that I've got my tape on here, instead of starting on the end and trying to pull that and bunch my tape all up, I'll start in the middle of the seam, and I'll go ahead and wipe the mud out from underneath, wipe my knife along the top of the tape, wiping the mud out from underneath. Now you're going to say, well, that's not going to work because your tape's not going to stick. You just wipe the mud out from underneath it. And I did, but you're leaving the mud, enough mud underneath the tape to create the bond. It's next to impossible to wipe that too tight to get all of the mud out. So you'll just go ahead and hold your knife at the angle that I'm holding it at, not like this, but like this, and wipe that tape, and that mud will come out from underneath the tape. So if you've noticed, I've made sure that I've wiped it and I've got it clean on the top, and I've also taken my knife and gone along the edge of the mud. Make sure that I wipe that off completely, putting pressure on the outside of my knife blade. I've got a nice clean seam now that's ready to coat, and with no bubbles or anything, and it is ready to coat at that stage. So let's go ahead and do an angle or corner seam next. On my angle or corner seam, again, I'll take my knife, put my mud on it, and I'll go ahead and coat each side of this at a time, one side at a time. So I'll take my knife, I'll make sure that I've got my mud on there liberally so that that surface, the whole corner surface, is covered. And I'll go ahead and make sure that there aren't any bubbles or any bare spots. Now when I'm doing two sides at a time, I want to be careful because when I'm wiping the opposite angle, sometimes might wipe a little bit of the other side's mud off. Once I've got my tape on there, tape is creased in the middle. You can take your tape and you can fold it and take your finger and push the corner up in to the, or push the tape up into the corner. It's important that you do that with your fingers a little bit and get your tape into the corner, because next, and you can start on the end this time, it doesn't bunch up when it's on a flat, as much as a flat seam, but you'll go ahead and you'll just softly push the corner of your knife blade into the angle. I say softly because if you push really hard, the knife corner is sharp and it'll cut that tape. You don't want to cut that tape. If you do, you don't have your structural integrity of your tape. And so, again, I will wipe that seam clean. I'll make sure that I don't have tape or mud on my tape. I'll take my outside edge of it on both outside edges and wipe them off and wipe them clean so I don't have to do any extra sanding with the all-purpose mud that I'm using. And I've got a nice clean angle to coat. Now, sometimes with angles, for whatever reason, the edges may pull up on you if you don't have them wiped down tight. And so just watch for that and make sure that the edge of your tape is pushed down tight, that you don't have bubbles and it's not coming up in any areas. So if you'll follow these basic steps with your taping, you'll be successful in avoiding bubbles and you'll have a lot more successful taping project. I hope this is helpful to you and that you'll continue to follow us here at drywallinstruction.com.